Welcome to Codex, History of Video Games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we're doing something a little bit different in that we're doing something a little bit the same.
It was a mistake. It was a mistake.
We knew this was going to happen eventually.
It was going to happen. And I actually posted in Discord about this. And someone's like, well, Tyler's told you the same thing like 2 times. And you've said it's the first time you've ever heard of it. I'm like, yeah, so it's going to happen. Okay. But I played Resident Evil for the podcast thinking this is it. This is going to be a big spooky Halloween episode. And I took the time to play the game thinking we'd never talked about it before. Turns out in 2020, we did an episode 125 on Resident Evil 1 and 2. So
wow. In 2020. So nobody really remembers 2020 anyway.
No, and it was actually the old Podaholics days too. Remember the Podaholics when we were on that network for a very short period of time? So
I don't remember at all because I'm a Podaholic. There was a bad joke in there somewhere.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, you were close. You almost got there. So essentially what we're doing today is I'm calling it Resident Evil Redux. I was going to call it Resident Evil Revisited. That's a mod for Resident Evil. You can't do that. So we're going to go over Resident Evil 1 again today. And we're going to still do the same history notes I had. There's not going to be much change in the history notes because guess what? It's history and it hasn't changed that much in 3 years. But at the end, I'm going to kind of talk about my experiences with it. And I'm going to bounce ideas off of you, Tyler.
Okay.
You can tell me what you think of these things because I have opinions now. And I really wish I did play the game when we did the episode because there was a time right after Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 1 where we were kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to do with the podcast. And one of the critiques we got, and actually a good critique, was I really wish you guys would play the games, because and it's a valid critique. I mean, we could we could. And I didn't have time to play Resident Evil 1 and 2 when we did the episodes. I haven't played Resident Evil 2, but I did play Resident Evil 1. So now we're going to get into it. This is like a full-on rehash of it. Let's start, as always, with the grime facts, okay? So developed by Capcom, it was initially released on March 22nd, 1996 in Japan. And the list of systems is pretty long because this game's been remade and re-released a lot. So originally on PlayStation, there was a director's cut on PlayStation in 1997, right after, like a year later. The DualShock version was released on August of 1998. The Sega Saturn version was released on July 25th, 1997. The Windows version, the original Windows version, was December 6th, 1996 in Japan. And then in North America, it showed up in September 17th of 1997. There was a Game Boy Color port that never happened. There was a GameCube remake on the March 22nd, 2022. And then a Nintendo DS port called Resident Evil Deadly Silence that I actually owned. And this is the game I sold, not realizing how valuable it was.
Yeah,
and that was released on January 19th, 2006. If you want that game now, last I checked, it was like $70 to get the copy for DS. Because it was just not a lot of them were made. And I didn't realize how rare it was when I bought it for like $10 at a Walmart on sale. I had no idea. So I think the best way to play this game and the way I played it is I played the remastered version on Steam. It has some minor quality of life changes that are really nice. It also has good controller support, so I could just play it on an Xbox controller and it wasn't an issue at all. I would recommend playing it that way. The quality of life changes are very much in like how they name things. Don't get me wrong. There's still some stuff with this game that drove me crazy that we will talk about later.
Is it the same as the GameCube remake on PC, or is it different?
This I think is a different remaster because it's definitely upscaled the textures more than I would say 2002. So I know, for example, the Resident Evil 2 version I have was actually released in like 2019.
Yeah, that's like a full-on like remake. It's not like just a remastered. We put the old game out. It's like they rebuilt the whole game.
Yeah, and this one I think is very much we just took the old one and upscaled the textures and made it look a little better. And it looks good. It looks actually really good. I'm kind of surprised by it. But the number of copies sold, according to Capcom's investor relations website, the original Resident Evil sold 2.75 million units. The director's cut version, and including the DualShock version, sold an additional 2.3 million copies. So shortly after release, this became the best-selling PlayStation game at the time. Like it
Oh,
was the
wow.
best one. So as far as sales go when it came out, it's probably been surpassed since then, but it's a very successful game. The genre or gameplay style, originally I wrote survival horror, but I'm going to put this in here too. Third person fixed camera survival horror, because I feel like that deserves to be mentioned in this.
Okay.
The average time to complete on howlongtobeat.com is 6.5 hours if you're just playing the main story, or 8 if you're doing everything. Or if you're me, my game took exactly 8 hours. Exactly. And I was following a guide to help me. And it took me 8 hours still. So I don't know who these people are that are doing it in 6.5 hours. Maybe they're people that have played it before and are just running through it. But yeah, there's also some achievements to beat it in like 3 hours or 5 hours. So
Dang.
they have like speed running achievements. I also played as Chris Redfield too. That's important note. You can play as two characters. I chose Chris Redfield because he had more health and I didn't want to die, which
Gotcha.
actually did help me out.
Does the story change or does it stay the same?
Does change a little bit,
Oh,
which is very exciting. So the Metacritic score of the original PlayStation version is a 91 out of 100. This is a good game. Okay, I'm gonna have my gripes with it, everybody, but it's a good game, and I swear it's a good game. Okay, so let's talk about the development of Resident Evil, though. It was actually influenced, this game, by a game from our early horror games video episode we did. Not video, but early horror games episode we had a long time ago. It was influenced by a game called Sweet Home, and Sweet Home is a 1989 NES game where you played as a team of documentary filmmakers entering an artist's mansion to recover 5 precious frescoes. And it actually was based on a movie, but Sweet Home is like one of the few examples where the video game was better than the movie it was
oh,
based
dang.
on. Yeah. So I haven't played Sweet Home. I actually have it on, I think, my Miu Mini. So I kind of need to try that out and give it a go. But it's definitely, that's the main influence of Resident Evil. And you can kind of gather that. It's like a spooky haunted mansion where there's puzzles and there's ghosts to get you and stuff like that. So it kind of, they replaced the ghosts with zombies and you got yourself Resident Evil. Okay. So Resident Evil was originally supposed to be a remake of Sweet Home. In fact, all the things Resident Evil is famous for, like the limited item inventory management, the maze like mansion, the puzzles that you have to backtrack to solve, survival focus over combat, the door loading screen, the use of scattered notes and diary entries to tell the story, the multiple endings you can have depending on how many characters survive, the use of death animations, individual character items like the lockpick or the lighter, like the nature of the game, the vibe of it, like pretty much all of it is directed from Sweet Home. So these things that to me stood out, like especially the door loading screens, like every time you go into a new room, it shows the door you're walking up to and it like opens it and it's really eerie and creepy. That was actually from Sweet Home.
Oh,
And
that's
they just,
pretty cool.
yeah, so they brought it into the Resident Evil, which I thought was pretty neat. Um, if you like Resident Evil, so you'll probably like Sweet Home, is what we're saying. So you should give that a go. If you're a big Resident Evil fan and you've never played it, give it a try. It is like an NES game, so it's a big graphical downgrade.
It's like if Resident Evil were an NES game.
Exactly, it's a demake of Resident
Yeah.
Evil, if anything.
It came
So
out before Resident Evil. So it's a demake that happened before the make.
exactly, it's a past demake, a time traveling demake. So, Sweet Home's creator, Takuro Fujiwara, actually said the quote, basic premise was that I'd be able to do the things that I wasn't able to include in Sweet Home, mainly on the graphics front. So like really it was like we're going into this thinking we're gonna make a Sweet Home remake and just make it upscale to make it nicer. The whole team hoped that the horror could come from its own genre. And spoilers, I think they nailed it. I think the horror is there. I think they really nailed it. And there's a couple reasons I think they nailed it, but we'll get to that at the end. The Resident Evil's development took 3 years to complete, which is kind of long for this
Yeah, for that
time
time period,
period.
that's a lot of
Pretty
games were
long.
being done in under a year in those days.
Yeah, and Shinji Mikami was initially commissioned to make a game set in a haunted mansion like Sweet Home, and then for the first 6 months, he worked alone on the script, the characters, and the setting. He took a lot of inspiration from the Overlook Hotel in the Stephen King movie The Shining, which is a pretty famous haunted location. And Mikami also cited the 1979 Zombie as a negative inspiration for the game.
So
So
you
like,
didn't want to be like
yeah, I
Zombie.
don't want to be like Zombie. We're making our own, And I think the zombies in Resident Evil are cool. I think they do a good job. Like we talked later about this, about how the zombie thing was really hit hard, but this was the first one to do it, and I think they did a really good job of it. Over time, the psychological horror was replaced with a George Romero, like, let's fight zombies kind of American style of game, and they moved away from the ghosts and went like all in on zombies. If it weren't for the 1992 game Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil would have been a first person shooter,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Like, Alone in the Dark did the fixed camera so well that Mikami just like switched the whole game over because he thought it was such a good way to do it. And the fixed camera is where the horror comes from. Like, it's annoying to someone like you or I, or probably a person that's been playing games where you can move the camera around with a joystick to like see everything in a third person video game. Resident Evil wouldn't be scary if it didn't have a fixed camera. Like, because there's a lot of corners you go around and there's a zombie and that's like your scary moment. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? They do that a lot. So, or there isn't a zombie and they do that enough to like make you think you're safe. It's really cool how they do it. Only a single concept art of the original first person prototype has been available since the 1990s, and it shows more similarity to Doom than anything else.
Hmm.
So it's almost like a Doom Resident Evil, which is kind of a cool thing. Like, if someone came out with that, I would play it.
Yeah. I bet you there's a Doom mod that's like Resident Evil. That seems like a very Doom community thing to do. There's a lot of Doom mods out there.
There's so many Doom mods out there. During the development, they also played with co-op mechanics, but they were removed from the game because they just didn't work really well. Like, having the game be a co-op game, which is kind of a bummer because team puzzles seems like it could be kind of a fun
Yeah.
thing.
I think later entries in Resident Evil have some co-op.
They do, yeah, they do, and we should play those if you want to get spooky with me. I know you don't like spooky games, Tyler. Spooky games.
We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see how spooky it gets. So the co-op, along with the cemetery level, the real-time weapon changes, and other experimental development features were all showed in like various previews of the game in 1995 and 1996, but they're later not in there. The cemetery area of the mansion, though, did make it into the GameCube remake of Resident Evil in 2002, which I think is the version that I played, because there
Okay.
is a cemetery area in where I played. And the previews also showed the guest houses in the tower later. Those were replaced by the guardhouse and the lab. So essentially, I guess it might be kind of spoilery here, but you start in the mansion and then you go into some tunnels and under the mansion, and then you go back to the mansion, and then you end up in a lab, and then you go back up, and then you end up in another lab. Like, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit between these areas. So you're not just in the haunted mansion the whole time.
Gotcha.
Uh, Even though Capcom had a motion capture studio during Resident Evil development, they didn't actually use it. Instead, the team just kind of kicked it old school and read books to see how certain enemies would move and behave, which I kind of think is neat. Like, mocap is a really cool technology, but also trying to animate it based off of like descriptions and stuff can really make it have like weird creepiness to it, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to doing that. Like if you're going for super duper realistic, then maybe the mocap is good. If you're looking to stylize something a little bit more, probably like you would be in a horror scenario, you might want to not do that.
Yeah, I gotta say that the scariest enemies to me were like the big spiders, because they don't make any noise. They're like really quiet. So you just see one walking behind you, and you're like, you know, like if you're not looking for it, you're like, it's there. There's no like
It's
audio
better.
cue to let them know they're there. Yeah. So two characters were replaced. Before you had Rebecca, who is like the medical officer in the group, you had Dewey, who would have been like a comic relief character. And instead of Barry, there was actually a cyborg named Geyser, Geizer. And they were like a strongman muscle character, but they replaced it with Barry instead. Rebecca is the character that you talk to probably the most throughout the game if you play as like Chris, and it was kind of nice having her there, but they had some really funny lines where it's just like, you're in this situation where you're clearly in like a haunted mansion and you're like just saying weird things that don't make sense, like, oh, this is going to take me so long or whatever. Like, it's like, yeah, you're in a haunted mansion. It's the dialogue is funny is what I would say. um, Almost all development was done on the silicone graphics hardware using the software program Soft Image. The PlayStation was chosen as the lead platform because the development team felt it was most appropriate for the game in terms of things such as like the amount of polygons. The development team had an upwards of like 80 different people towards the end of development. So it was like a pretty big
It's a pretty big team.
project. Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
big project. And again, a long project for like this time of year. This year. Capcom hesitantly ported the Resident Evil to the Sega Saturn because at first they weren't sure the hardware could handle it. But then they essentially told people that a port would take a while, and the Saturn version was finally unveiled in April 1997 at the Tokyo Game Show, at which Capcom also showed a demo for the sequel on PlayStation. So by the time the Saturn like version was revealed, they were already kind of in Resident Evil 2 and almost there. The live action full motion video sequences were filmed in Japan with a cast of American actors. All Japanese releases contain English voice acting with Japanese captions and text, which is kind of interesting. They didn't actually
Hmm.
do like Japanese voice acting.
That's like
However,
Final Fantasy 16 did that too more
uh,
recently. It's like
oh,
I don't even think there's an option for Japanese voiceover in any version of it. I think it's all English.
I wonder why not. Yeah. Like, however, Japanese voice performances also were recorded, I guess, but they just never were used.
Hmm.
That's what,
So
yeah.
that's the stylistic choice they made then.
Well, here's the other part. Mikami found that the quality of the performances were inadequate, so he didn't like the Japanese voice acting versus the American voice acting, which
Oh.
is kind of a oh no.
This is a subs versus dubs
Yeah,
argument?
I think it might be a subs versus dubs argument. So, lead programmer Yasuhiro Anpo later said that due to all the development staff being Japanese, they were unaware of the quote poor localization that apparently quote hindered realism and immersion of the title. So for the international release, which was what like they kind of redubbed the whole thing in the 2002 remake, essentially is what they did because they just felt like the voice acting wasn't really hitting hard, and it still kind of doesn't hit right. It feels a little bit weird, and a little off at times. So the game in Japan, this is kind of the big thing. It's called Resident Evil for us. It is called Biohazard in Japan. Biohazard was renamed for the North American and Europe markets after Chris Kramer, the director of communications at Capcom, pointed out that it would be impossible to trademark the name in the United States.
Mm,
Among others, the 1992 game Biohazard Battle and the New York alternative metal hand Biohazard were already using the name at the time.
mm.
So they didn't call it Biohazard in the US because that name just couldn't be trademarked. And I think Resident Evil is a pretty like good name
That's a pretty good name, yeah. I think it's better than Biohazard.
for sure. Biohazard, this game would have been forgettable, but Resident Evil, that's like something we all know. Capcom therefore ran an internal company contest to actually figure out this new name. And the name Resident Evil was settled upon since the game takes place in a mansion. And Kramer actually thought the game was super cheesy, like the name was super cheesy. He said, quote, "This was super cheesy. I can't remember what it felt like was a better alternative. Probably something stupid about zombies, but the rest of the marketing crew loved it and were ultimately unable to convince Capcom Japan and Mikami-san that the name fit." End quote. So he didn't like Resident Evil. I like it. Do you like
Yeah,
it?
I think it's so funny how those kinds of things work because I also like it, but I've heard that term so much, only referring to the game, right? So I feel like if you're naming something and you don't have already the like context of what it means, like to us, Resident Evil means a very specific thing. It's a very specific, like it's a video game series, but to them it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so it's just interesting. Like naming things is so weird because you're like, this doesn't mean anything to me. And then, 30 years later, it's like, no, this is
This is the
synonymous with
name.
survival horror now.
Yeah. Resident Evil's the big one. So, all right. Let's also talk about the ending theme of the game. So there's a big difference between the Japanese and the US version of the game. And the original Japanese PlayStation version features like vocals, like an actual song performed by like a J-pop band.
Ooh.
And that is not in the American version of the game. But the American version, the cover artwork for it, the American and the European release was done by an artist, Bill Sienkiewicz, I think is how you say it. And they did the art for that. So we got like different things between the Japanese versions and the American or the North American and European versions. There's two different things going on there. Fujiwara said that the game was originally targeted towards a core audience and he only expected it to sell like around 200,000 copies before the game went on to like sell millions. So it was kind of a surprise to him that the game was so popular because he didn't really know how well a horror game would sell. He's even quoted as saying that. He's like, I don't know if this is going to work out. Um, Anpo said that the Capcom did not expect the game to be successful. So this was kind of like a big surprise. This was out of nowhere, Resident Evil. But so that's kind of the development story of the whole thing. I'm going to talk about what it is now. If you didn't know what Resident Evil is for our younger listeners, maybe you're unfamiliar with the game. You probably actually are familiar more with the modern
Yeah.
versions of it.
Resident Evil's still very much in the gamer zeitgeist.
Yeah, because there is Resident Evil Biohazard, there's Resident Evil Village, and those are all first person shooters. This one was the original, and it was a wee bit different, as you can guess. So, the original story behind it is on July 24th, 1998. A series of bizarre murders occur in the outskirts of the fictional Midwestern town Raccoon City. And then, so Raccoon City's police, like special tactics department, stars are sent in to investigate. And of course, they have a Bravo team and they have an Alpha team because
Gotta.
what you have to. And then the Bravo team is completely lost. And then Alpha team goes in and they are like essentially who you're playing as, but they're also attacked at the, and they're the Bravo teams like they go find the Bravo team's crashed helicopter, and then they're suddenly attacked by a pack of monstrous dogs, like spoilers, zombie dogs, everybody. Okay. And they kill a team member, Joseph Frost, and then they all escape. So Brad Vickers, the helicopter pilot, takes off alone and leaves the team stranded there. And so the remaining members of the team, who are Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Albert Wesker, Barry Burton, and also Rebecca, who I forgot to write Rebecca's last name down. You can't forget Rebecca. She's the
Can't
medical
forget about
person,
Rebecca.
and she also does a lot of stuff too. If you do things a certain way, you actually play as Rebecca at one part. So it's kind of like an interesting thing. But they're all forced to seek refuge in this nearby abandoned spooky mansion. So that's how they get there. There are the story is pretty silly and ridiculous, but it's like a classic fun horror story. There's like different plots. There's people that are double agents. There's a lot of scary like situations. There's a lot of cool monsters. Like that's something I didn't really touch on in the first episode we did of this because I hadn't played the game. You got your standard issue giant animals that are scary. You got a giant snake. You
That's
got
scary.
a giant spiders,
Very
multiple giant
scary.
spiders. You have giant zombie sharks.
Whoa.
Yeah, slept on that when we did the original episode. The zombie shark lab is one of my favorite parts of the whole game. It's super cool, it's super scary, and it also is like super tense because they have this moment where you have to like do things in a certain order or the whole place is gonna like implode. It's pretty cool. Um, that's There's a lot going on here, but the reason this game is so important is they did three very specific things, and I might have some edits onto these now that I've played it. But first, they were showed that you could bring like successful survival horror to video games. Like at the time, this game was scary and it still is scary. Like there's a couple times I jumped. Granted, the biggest time I jumped when playing Resident Evil was when my wife walked into the room and I didn't hear her and she touched my shoulder. That made me the most scared the whole game. But it's just really intense. Like they really nailed this whole like idea of you're walking through this mansion, you turn corners, and because it's a fixed camera, you don't see what's around the corner. So even if you don't get jump scared, you still feel on edge. And if you play this game on your PC at night, like I did, and you have the lights off, it's gonna freak you out. Okay, everybody. So if you want a scary experience, I would recommend this game. Um, you also got to manage your inventory, solve puzzles and everything while not being murdered by zombies, which is kind of big. The backtracking thing to it is something that I don't know if I enjoy. Because, Tyler, I'm going to say something upsetting to you. I know I'm about to upset you because it involves Metroid. I don't think that style is for me, the backtracking style. And that's all that Resident Evil kind of is.
Yeah,
It's a
I get
lot of
that.
like, and because of this item management system that drives me insane, which I will talk about when my like ending section, it made it way worse. But let's go on to the why the game's important. So the second reason it's important is this game brought forth like a cinematic nature to video games. Like even though it was by no means like Oscar worthy, the B movie cutscenes like did show that video games could be like cinematic and tell a really fun story, even if it is like a cheesy horror story. Like they really
Mhm.
nailed that there. And third, are you, Tyler, tired of zombies in the genre of horror now?
I am now. Maybe in 1996, I would have been a child and probably wouldn't have played it. But I don't know. The zombie thing at this point, we've sort of come back around on. Like it's just a backdrop for everything now. So I wouldn't say I'm tired of them. I'm just tired of bad zombie stories. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, well, you have Resident Evil to thank for that. The fact that you're tired of bad zombie stories,
Yeah.
because this game did it so well and it was so successful. They're kind of the ones that started the whole like the zombie times that we had. Because I think like Left 4 Dead was great and that was zombies and they really nailed it. But I'm thinking about like the Call of Duty zombies, which I know what people are big fans of. I am
Yeah.
not a big fan of. I'm kind of over it. But it just seems like zombies were everywhere in pop culture in the early 2000s, and it really has Resident Evil to thank for that because they're the first ones to bring them back into light. Um, I so now that we've kind of talked about that, like, and we talked about how like Sweet Home introduced this game, Resident Evil perfected it. I'm going to talk about my thoughts on Resident Evil. And the first question I wrote down is going to be, should you play this game now? And I would say if you like horror and you enjoy puzzle solving, then this game is for you. I think you should still play it. The Resident Evil remaster, it holds up. You can still play this fine. If you do not like either one of those things, I would say do not play this game because there are going to be elements of it that drive you insane. Like if you don't like a fixed camera, and you don't like occasionally walking in one direction and then the camera shifting and then you back in the other direction, which happened to me a couple times. Uh,
Because the
actually,
controls change or
yeah, the controls change based on what the angle is of the camera. So if you're holding forward and then you go around a corner and then the angle's different, you could end up start running in a different direction. It's supposed to hold it, but it definitely doesn't at times. Like I ended up running into the wall a couple times. And if you're trying to run away from like a zombie or a zombie dog, that is really frustrating when it happens. Um, I think you should play this game though if you like horror and you want to know what it's all about. If you do like horror, you probably played this game already. I mean, not to like bash anybody that's just getting into the genre, but you should play this if you haven't. I would recommend doing it. And it also, I'm gonna keep playing them. Like I enjoyed it enough that I'm gonna keep playing the Resident Evil games. I have them all through like a humble bundle, and I'm actually really excited to see looking back on this when I play like Village or
Hmm.
Biohazard, like seeing how much this genre and this game has changed because it's changed quite a bit. So I think you should play the game right now if you like horror. That fixed camera is frustrating but necessary. The game wouldn't be scary if you could move the camera around. It would actually be, I would argue, very, very mediocre if you could peek around corners before going around them. So that's my thought on the fixed camera. It has to be in there. It's a little frustrating, but you get used to it. The thing that frustrated me the most is this item system. So you have 6 item slots in your inventory. When you pick everything up and fill it up, the only way to take things out of your inventory is by going to these safe item boxes in these safe rooms throughout the mansion or like the levels and depositing items in. You can't swap items.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you're like me and you're a video game item hoarder that likes to pick everything up, that means you'll pick up all these herbs and things you don't need in that moment. And then you'll get to a key item that you need to progress and you can't swap it. So, you have to walk all the way back to the safe room through the zombies again to then drop your stuff off and then come back.
So it's like always keep an empty slot or two when you come out of a safe room.
Yeah, that's what I learned. And when I learned that, then it made it a lot easier for me. It also makes you like make some strategic decisions about, okay, do I need to bring this extra box of ammo or can I just go with the bullets I have? But this could have been fixed by just letting you swap items on the ground. And the fact that you can't do that is really frustrating to me. And it just seems like it's one of those things that wastes your time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing I noticed about Resident Evil is there's certain aspects of it that waste your time. For example, on the eastern side of the mansion, there is a safe room under some stairs. If you the door next to the safe room on the same level will start saying a message saying that the door handle is breaking. Do you want to use it? And you keep using it. And it does it like 2 or 3 times. And then it breaks the door handle and you can't go through the door. And I'm like, okay, that's like a thing. And then so then you got to walk back up the stairs and go down and around to kind of make you go through more of the zombie levels again, right? But then after a certain point, it just says, "Oh, the door handle's fixed," and they just open it for you. So I'm like, why did you do that? Why did you just waste my time and make me walk all the way around? It's old, it's old video game baloney. The things that old video games would make you do
Mm-hmm.
that that just kind of make the game longer.
And
If that
just sort of
makes sense.
extend the time, yeah, or in an
Yeah.
attempt to like, okay, so they're making you go through all those things by breaking the door handle, and then later they're like, now you don't have to do those things again. The door handle's fixed.
Exactly.
And you're
That's
like,
exactly what
okay.
they did. And I'm like, can we not do that? Like, it's an old video game trope. I get it, I guess. It's just it's frustrating to me. So that drove me a little nuts. There are some cool moments and some cool settings. So I love, and this kind of goes into the second point too, where like the story is fun too. Like the zombie sharks thing, I did not see coming at all. And so when I went down and to this like flooded lab and there were zombie sharks, I was like super excited because it gave me like Deep Blue Sea vibes. Remember that movie?
Oh yeah. Oh, I know.
Where Samuel Jackson has like the motivational speech and then he just gets like eaten by the shark in the middle of the thing. Like I it gave me that kind of vibe and you have to like walk through and the sharks are like the water is just enough so they can like swim and you can run through it. And so it's really like intense and you got to run through this lab and then you get to the bottom part and you notice that it's like an emergency and like now that it's flooded with water the chamber's going to break so you have to figure out these valves and do things in a certain order to actually make it like go into like safe mode or whatever so you can go through and then drain the tank and it's just really really cool and then on top of that there's like a Jaws reference that I loved too because you walk past a shark that you think it's dead. It's the biggest shark down there and then you go onto this ledge and then the shark comes to life and you're like stuck on this ledge and you have to electrocute the shark like in Jaws Revenge, where you like push a box into the water and then turn a switch on. And it's like the boss is called like Big Neptune or something like that. It's just really silly. It's really fun. And that was like probably my favorite sequence of moments in the game because you also get the combat shotgun too at that point, like the automatic spaz shotgun, which is pretty neat. So
Now you're
uh,
making me want to play this. That shark stuff sounds fun.
it's really fun. The shark stuff is cool. The puzzles are cool too. Like the puzzles are a little different. Like there's a puzzle at one time where you have to take there's like a portrait with like insects on it, and then there's not a portrait, like a case with insects on it, like one of those like display dioramas of real insects where you put the needles
Hmm.
in to like pin them, right? And then there's one that's fishing hooks, and then if you switch them, that's what unlocks the door because it's like a bee fishing hook on the bug one, and then there's an actual bee on the fishing hook one. You switch them, and then that's
Oh,
like
okay.
so like little puzzles like that. And then the funniest part to me is there's a moment where there are these like bugs that are like it's like giant zombie bees, I guess, like bees who have had
Zombies.
zombies, but they're not that big. They're the size of a baseball, still way too big for a
That's
bee,
it's
if
a
you
pretty
ask
big
me.
bee.
Yeah, pretty big for a bee, but not like the size because the spiders are like huge, like the size of a man,
Hmm.
but the bees were like in this area, and in order to get them, you have to like spray them. So it was like this weird moment where it felt like I was being like a pest control guy in a zombie mansion. Which I just thought was really funny. So it's like funny moments like that where I'm like, this is good. And then also the silly, like Jill and Chris, like Jill, so when I played as Chris Redfield, Jill is captured and you don't know where she is. And you have the option to save her by getting these like discs that unlock a door in the bottom. And I'm pretty sure it's just flipped if you play as Jill, like Chris is the one captured. Like I'm pretty sure it's the same way. Um, And then once you get Jill and you get Rebecca, I'm going to talk about the end of the game now. This is the very end of the game. Like after the big story reveal has happened and you fought like a big boss. Um, you have to go up to the helipad where this guy that abandoned you, this helicopter pilot, Brad, can pick you up.
Man,
And
we don't like Brad.
we don't like
Abandoned us.
Brad. He just abandoned you. He just left. It's so messed up. So yeah, because yeah, Brad Vickers is the name of the helicopter pilot who you've been trying to talk to the whole game. Like he'll randomly just spot and be like, "Is anyone there?" And you're like, "Hey, Brad, I'm here," and he just ignores you. And because it wouldn't be a horror game without a broken radio. I'll tell you that much, or a helicopter crashing.
True.
And you get to the helipad top, and then they're like with you, and then the big bad comes, and the big bad is called the Tyrant, and he's this giant like zombie guy, right? And he's like the ultimate weapon, because he's like an amalgamation of the T virus and the human beings, and it's like the perfect
The
super
perfect
weapon monster.
organism.
Yeah. And you're fighting him with your handgun or your shotgun or whatever you got. But he'll still attack the NPCs. So like Rebecca and Jill just got beat up while I just wailed on this guy with a gun. And then Brad all of a sudden goes, "Oh, wait, there's a rocket launcher." And he throws it out of the helicopter. And you just shoot the thing. It's just that silly campy horror game that you need, I feel like, and that's what makes it fun. So that's why I loved it, and I'm hoping that continues into the other Resident Evils. I haven't read anything about them, so I'm gonna play 2 next, which apparently you just told me is a full-on
Yeah.
remake, right?
Big ol' a real remake, not just we took the old game and put it on new platforms with an up-res. It's like a full new game.
Yeah. I'm excited to try it out. The last thing I wanted to like mention about this is like the mansion itself is kind of a character in that there's like a story behind it with the people who originally built it, and you kind of find their logs and stuff, and it talks about like what the mansion is for and all this thing, everything there too, which is really cool. um I would say if you're like me, and I am very impatient when it comes to puzzles, even when I make a puzzle in Dungeons and Dragons for like players, like if I make a puzzle, I try to make it as obvious as possible because I do not like convoluted puzzles in video games. I used a guide. If you're that kind of person that wants to experience this game without having to like sit there and write stuff down and remember where things are, like old school, where you'd have like a piece of paper and write, like draw yourself a map,
Mhm.
I would say following a guide is the way to go. I fully recommend it. I played the game on easy. I followed a guide. I had a great time because of it. I rarely died, essentially. And I think that's what made it fun for me, is it was just a lot more of a chill experience. I tried to make the game as chill as
Did you
possible.
play it on easy?
I did.
That's
I
the
played it
move.
on easy. Played it
Especially
on
for old
easy.
games where you're trying to play it just sort of for the experience of having played the game. Easy is the way
Exactly.
to
And
go.
I would highly recommend that to anybody. If you're just trying to experience Resident Evil, I would play it on easy. I'd use a guide, just do all that stuff. Have fun, because that's what made it fun for me. Because if I was like, there were moments with it where I thought to myself, I would not have figured that out in years. I would have just stopped playing the game because I would not have figured out what to do in this situation with those puzzles. So I'm glad having the guide there helped, because there's some very convoluted things to it. You know what I mean? So with that though, I would say I recommend this game. I would say you should play it if you're a fan of horror, or if you just want to experience a little slice of video game history, or if you want some context because you really want to watch the movie that's bad that we should
The
cover.
Mila Jovovich movie?
Yeah, you and I should watch that
Oh,
for the
I've seen a
podcast.
lot of them.
I have too.
Yeah.
I think I've seen all of them, but
I
we should watch them for the podcast
ba
because
basically all the ones that would have come out in high school, I think I saw because I had a friend who was really into Resident Evil and would always wanna watch the movie, like, when they came out. So I have seen most of those movies, at least when I was in high school.
yeah, we should definitely watch these together. I
Alright.
would be down to do that. I'd be
Maybe
down to
a
do the next
commentary
Codex
episode.
commentary. Yeah, yeah. Maybe we do that soon, because
Okay.
I think it's a fun idea.
Yeah.
And then next year I want to do Silent Hill. Finally, I want to talk about Silent Hill, and I might
Okay.
play 1 and 2 for that, because I've heard 2 is the really good one.
That's what I've heard too.
1 is like, why are you playing this? But anyway, I like the game Resident Evil. I'm glad we could revisit it. I really wish I had talked about it more before and played it before, but it's a good game. Most of this was rehashed, but I think it was worth it. We're not going to do these too often. I just really made a goof. I really messed up this week.
Hey,
So
I
with
didn't
that,
catch it either. You were like, "I'm gonna do Resident Evil this week." I was like, "Yeah, sounds good."
yeah, but we both just didn't know, which is so funny. So anyway, Tyler, what you been playing this
I've
week?
been Just going ham on Spider-Man 2 mostly. Really loving it. I think I talked about it last week. If you like the first Spider-Man games, this is more of that, and it's the world's a little bit bigger. They added Queens and Brooklyn, and there's a whole new story, and you get to switch back and forth between Miles and Peter. So
Ooh.
yeah, it's super fun. I'm really enjoying it. The wingsuit has added a lot to it. You can get across the city a lot faster now. Also, the fast travel in the game is really cool because you can basically just like pick a spot on the map and it just like puts you there, like from
Whoa.
and no loading screen. It just like drops you in the spot. You have to unlock it by doing stuff in like that area of the city. But once you have it unlocked, you can just like zip all around, which is kind of awesome.
Are you doing
Um,
like the collectibles thing too? Are you trying to get like everything and do all that stuff?
Yeah, I think I will try to go for everything. The stuff that usually gets me on those kinds of things are like the combat challenges where it's like beat 8,000 people in under 40 seconds. And you're like, well, I don't want to do this over and over again until I like figure out how to cheese it, you know?
Yeah.
So we'll see. But I did platinum trophy Miles Morales. So I don't know. We'll see.
Nice. The
Um,
the other one's on PC for sale. The original one is
I
on sale on
know.
PC, and I'm like tempted, but I'm like, I gotta hold off. I gotta hold off. I got too many games. It's not gonna
Yeah.
go
I mean,
anywhere.
if you
It'll
haven't played
always
them
be there.
before, they're worth it. Like they're really good. If you haven't played them before, I'm like waiting for more sale to buy them on PC because I played them
Well,
already.
you
I already bought them
convinced
twice.
me because I got my long HDMI cord so I can play PC games in my bed on my big TV like that.
That's
Because
me.
that's the move for me. Is I'm not really going to be a console gamer anymore. I'm going to commit to like stringing the HDMI cord around my room to make
That's what
sure
I
I got
did.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the move.
The only reason I have a console now is so I can play Spider-Man 2 because it's not on PC. Otherwise, I would just bought on PC.
It's true. It's true.
Yep. Other than that, Super Mario Wonder, still playing that, working my way through it slowly. Great game. Everything everybody says online about Super Mario Wonder, it's all true. Game's awesome.
I really want to get that too. Katie and I should play that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll be a good time.
What are you
Cool.
playing?
Well, I am obsessed with Return to Moria, the survival building like Lord of the Rings dwarf game. And I told Tyler, it's not for you. It's not for you. And
Lord of
you
the
don't
Rings,
care.
survival horror,
You don't
crafting.
you don't care. It's not survival horror. It's not
Oh,
horror. It's just survival
just
crafting. Now,
survival craft. Okay.
there are scary moments like where you get scared because you're like, oh, I don't have the stuff, and there's like
Yeah.
orcs
Well, because
attacking.
the stakes are high, right? Especially if
Yeah,
it's like a survival game. Yeah.
yeah. But I beat Resident Evil on Sunday right after we recorded last week's episode. And then, which was great because on Tuesday, Return to Moria came out, and I've been obsessed all week. Like it's what I've been doing every night when I play a game, usually. And it's just really fun. Like they have the fan service stuff for me and like other friends of mine who are really into Lord of the Rings. Like they have like you're following the trail of the Fellowship, and they have like little markers. They have all these lore articles. You're doing stuff. You're unlocking new areas. You're rebuilding it. Like it just feels. It's not an amazing game, but it's an amazing game that it felt like it was made for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is what how I describe it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna tell everyone to buy this game because if you like survival crafting, there's probably better survival crafting games out there, to be completely honest. But for a setting and this, like, I'm super into it. Like, I've heard of a lot of similarities to it took a lot from Valheim, and I never played Valheim, but that's apparently one of like the cream of the crop of survival
Mm-hmm.
games. So in that sense, it's good. So that's what I've been playing a lot this week.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't know when I'm going to start Resident Evil 2. I have no idea. I might start it soon. I might not. I might play it. I might wait until I get my PC all set up so I can play it on my TV, though.
There you go. So you can
That's the
turn all the
move.
lights off, play on huddle around your TV with your controller, and
With like a big cube of Mountain Dew. Just live my
yeah,
truth.
and under the covers.
Pretend I'm 13 again.
Yep.
Maybe have a couple hot pockets. Who knows? A pizza lunchable. Oh, we'll live our best lives. I think I realized um, that I think we might actually have an email to read
Ooh.
this week, and we haven't really read any emails in a while, but there is an email here from it looks like it's from Nick, and he says here, hi, he says, great show. Just sending you an email to say I have just started listening to your show. Started episode 1, and I'm absolutely loving it. Super interesting, and I'm enjoying learning more about video games. My kids enjoy your show too. Thanks again, Nick. And that was just such a nice,
Oh,
sweet
thanks, Nick.
email. I want to say thanks, Nick. I'm glad your kids enjoy the show. That's what we want to do. That's why I'm like, it's worth doing Resident Evil again, because
Mhm.
there are people that maybe weren't born when that game came out, like you and I, because I'm old, and they want to experience it. So I think you should, little video game history.
Yeah.
Do that, and it's cheap because it's an old game. It's super cheap. It goes on sale all the time for like $5.
Yep. Buy it on PC. Is it on Good Old Games? Probably on Good Old Games too.
It's probably on Good Old Games. I bought it. I might have actually got it as a humble bundle with all of. That's
Oh.
how because I have all the Resident Evil games up to Biohazard. I don't have Village, but I have all of them that way, including Resident Evil 0. The numbering is confusing.
There are no Resident Evil games on Good Old Games.
Okay, so then I think you have to buy it on Steam or get it through Humble Bundle. I would recommend Humble Bundle because they probably might do it soon if it's horror time, But anyway, that's the show, I think, for today. I feel pretty good about it, Tyler.
All right. Yeah, that was good. I'm glad we redid it. I would be curious what people think of us going back and redoing episodes that maybe we have more context on now, or for whatever reason we feel like kind of redoing them.
Maybe we accidentally found something that people want.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Resident Evil is $5 on Steam right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. See, just pick it up. Give it a go. Zombie sharks. I think it's worth it for the zombie sharks alone. You could probably just get to the point in the game where the zombie sharks happen and stop playing and still have a good time and get your money's worth.
They're all on sale right now. I might buy a bunch of these just to have them.
Well, if there's a co-op one, you should try to find out which ones are co-op and get those so you and I can play together, because I have all of them.
Okay. Yeah, the Resident Evil Halloween pack has Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 3. And it's the 2 and 3 remakes, I think.
Yeah, I have the 2. How much is it? $15?
$22 for those 4 games.
It's not bad at all for those 4 games. It's pretty great. So yeah, we're not here to be a shill for Steam, though. You know what I'm saying? Gabe Newell isn't paying us anything.
I'm thinking this seems pretty good. Last of Us Part 1's on sale. Yeah, lots of spooky games are on sale right now.
A lot of spooky time. Well, Tyler, do you want to say bye to everyone?
Yeah.
Before we go today?
Goodbye, everyone.